Hurricanes have been called the most destructive natural disaster on the planet, and history books can confirm their ruthless reputation since the dawn of time. From the 18th century tropical storm which annihilated the Caribbean to the destructive blow delivered to the victims of Texas in 2017, here are 10 of the most devastating hurricanes in history. 10. Hurricane Harvey. In August 2017, a seething tropical tempest travelled from the Gulf of Mexico with a vengeance, known only to a Category 4 storm. With gales 130 miles per hour, the coastal communities of Corpus Christi and Galveston didn't stand a chance. This was the first hurricane since Wilma in 2005, in which the predecessor took the lives of 62 and caused $27.4 billion in damages. Since Texas was by no means new to the devastation of these water storms, the approach of Hurricane Harvey inflicted havoc and fear for what could only come next. The most damage endured by the Lone Star State was to Houston, the fourth largest city in the United States. In this heavily populated region, severe flooding enveloped the streets as Harvey hovered for days at a time. 127 centimeters of rain was dumped down on Houston in the span of 4 days. Roughly the same amount of water endured by the state in an entire year. Consequences comprised the entire metropolis of Beaumont to suffer without fresh water for the duration of Harvey's wrath. In addition, more than 13,000 victims required rescuing, and 30,000 were displaced by the ferocious floodwaters. While Texas was hit hard, surrounding states such as Alabama and Tennessee suffered consequences from Hurricane Harvey as well. FEMA Director Brock Long went on record to claim the disaster the worst the state's ever seen. With damages soaring at $121 billion, the tragedy soon became known as the second most expensive storm in US history, since Hurricane Katrina. 82 lives were lost due to the storm's relentless dumping of water, in which flash floods caused victims to drown in rapids swarming the city roads. During the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, this image started to make rounds across the internet. The tweet it originated in says, "Believe it or not, this is a shark on the freeway in Houston, Texas. Hashtag Hurricane Harvey." Do you believe this image is real or a hoax? Find out at the end of this video. 9. Hurricane Sandy. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy was no sweet surprise to victims of the East Coast, as for days they anticipated the destruction that had already pummeled through Jamaica, Cuba and Haiti. By the time Sandy struck American soil, the huge, yet slow-moving storm began weakening to a post-tropical cyclone. Though that didn't diminish the mayhem thrust upon the shores of New York City and New Jersey. The Category 3 catastrophe left lower Manhattan submerged underwater, with residents lacking power for several days due to storm tides thrusting upon the city at more than 13 feet. Parts of Staten Island and beaches in Queens were ravaged and barely recognizable. Damages in other parts of the northeast region obliterated 650,000 homes and killed 117 people within US territory alone. In Canada and the Caribbean, 69 lives were lost as a result of Sandy's wrath. In total, the impact in damages reached $65 billion, in which $30 billion alone was extracted from one of America's most popular gaming and resort capitals, Atlantic City. The hurricane is also well known as Superstorm Sandy, since features of the squall changed from tropical to a winter storm, denoting less pressure upon hitting the coast of New York City. 8. Hurricane Camille. Despite the nice name, Camille was particularly nasty, inviting heavy flooding and winds of 200 miles per hour to the Gulf Coast, and later Virginia. This 1969 hurricane was one of only 3 Category 5 hurricanes to strike the US continent since 1900. After forming near the Cayman Islands, she blew through Cuba as a Category 3 and soon intensified in her path of destruction towards the good-natured swamps of Mississippi. Camille reduced to a tropical storm before reaching Virginia, yet didn't hold back on unleashing 20 inches of rain upon the region, with flash floods and mudslides wiping out heavily populated areas only 120 miles from the nation's capital. The death toll hit 256 deaths, with more than $1.4 billion in damage from the catastrophic Camille. The storm played a powerful role in the country's tracking system, however, producing the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale as a result. The intent was to rank storms from categories of 1 through 5, depending on wind velocity. While Category 1s display winds racing along at 74 to 95 miles per hour, Category 5s feature speeds of more than 156 miles per hour. The scale has been a saving grace to regions prone to this type of natural disaster, providing danger zones a clear idea of what to expect in the face of a tropical fury. 7. Hurricane Gilbert. When it comes to measuring a hurricane, wind rapidity, the quantity of rainfall, lives lost, and economic damage will do the trick. That or the terrifying reality of the beast's sheer size alone. Hurricane Gilbert stood out to meteorologists due to its massive size. Spanning 500 miles in diameter, this earned the storm the brave accolade of largest hurricane ever observed in the Atlantic Basin. Beginning near the Cape Verde Islands on the west coast of Africa, Hurricane Gilbert originated in the birthplace of some of the worst hurricanes in history. This 1988 Category 5 storm covered the entire expanse of Jamaica and destroyed 80% of the island's homes. Gilbert continued to the Cayman Islands and Mexico, where it weakened in force, yet whittled a fear-stricken path zigzagging toward Texas. Here, Gilbert dispersed into a series of teeming tornadoes, wreaking havoc that resulted in 318 casualties, including 200 people in floods swarming Mexico, and 28 Cuban crewmen who were thrown from their freight ship into a shrimp boat. The damage cast by Gilbert amounted to an astounding $5.5 billion. 6. Labor Day Hurricane. In 1935, a Category 5 storm brought 200 miles per hour winds to the Florida Keys, sending a downpour of soaking rain into the region and killing approximately 400 people in its wake. The Labor Day hurricane earned the tag based on the time of year it struck, since the practice of hurricane naming wouldn't ensue for another 20 years. Said to be the strongest to hit the United States in the 20th century, more than half of its victims were World War I veterans, working together on building a highway which would stretch from Key West to Key Largo. The storm arrived at a time premature to the advances of weather tracking technology, including the crucial use of Doppler radar systems, in which meteorologists could predict where a storm would surrender. The lack of trackability left residents completely in the dark as the seething thunderstorm approached. Many victims merely prayed for mercy and awaited an evacuation train which never came, as it was wiped away from the tracks in what became a futile rescue attempt. $6 million in damage was projected from the hefty hurricane, which ravaged the Key West archipelago and crippled the Sunshine State's economy. 5. Hurricane Katrina. This one is tricky, as many insist the disaster man-made rather than natural, due to the decimation inflicted upon New Orleans and surrounding regions of the Gulf Coast. Despite faulty infrastructure or poor city management, there's no denying Hurricane Katrina, the sole culprit and instigator for so much death and destruction of one city. Affecting the coast from central Florida to eastern Texas, Katrina claimed 1,833 lives and racked up a bill of $161 billion in what is considered the costliest hurricane in America. According to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the tragedy was the single most catastrophic natural disaster in US history. On August 26, 2005, Katrina appeared to be dissolving when she took a deadly turn for the worst. Growing to a Category 5 level over the warmer waters of the Gulf, mandatory evacuation orders were bellowed across New Orleans. Residents were either stuck where they were or refused to leave, as high-rising waters began rushing around their homes and families. Despite slightly shrinking to a Category 3 once reaching the city, water toppled over its system of levees and caused them to burst. Within seconds, the streets began to flood. In due time, 80% of the metropolis, famous for Creole culture and Mardi Gras, was left underwater. The repercussions from Katrina are unfortunate for several reasons. First, 40% of the hurricane-related deaths are due to drowning. Public claims that slow federal restrictions due to the blatant disregard for a poor and black population led to the plight of those affected. Second, 400,000 victims were displaced to other areas, such as Houston and Atlanta, sadly to never return to the festive hub that once made the Louisiana region so special. Lastly, an improved system of levees was administered in 2013, yet authorities have struggled with the massive cost of maintenance, considering a severely decreased tax base. 4. Hurricane Maria. The name Maria sounds pleasant, yet the Maria by way of Category 5 hurricane is anything but mild. What's worst is that she's the second of her category to ravish a region in 2017 alone, making her unwelcome debut only weeks after the brutal Hurricane Irma swept through the Atlantic Ocean. Maria was one of the most vicious, because her path covered much of the same territory. Hurricane Maria reached the tiny island of Dominica on September 18, 2017, before setting off in another whirlwind, denoting speeds of 175 miles per hour. She ricocheted off Guadeloupe and the US Virgin Islands before seeking to destroy the island of Puerto Rico just 2 days later. Despite having weakened to a mere Category 4, Maria remained unyielding with 155 mile per hour winds and 10 inches of rainfall. While the official death toll reads 146, those observant to the disaster claim the total much higher. In August of the following year, Puerto Rico authorities reviewed the death count and revised the number to an incredible 2,975. Costs in damages soared to $1.31 billion for Dominica and an astonishing $90 billion for Puerto Rico. At one point alone, 90% of the population was without electricity, as all of the utility poles were eliminated in the breadth of the storm. Sadly, the beautiful island, known for its tropical rainforests and colourful colonial buildings, still hasn't recovered from the hit, as hundreds of thousands of inhabitants have moved to the mainland since. Maria was the deadliest storm to hit Puerto Rico, and the third costliest tropical storm to affect the United States after Katrina and Harvey. 3. The Galveston Hurricane. While Katrina may have stolen the show for biggest price tag, she cannot claim the title of worst storm to ever hit the Gulf Coast. In September 1900, the Galveston hurricane scoured the coastal community of Texas and took with it an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 lives. The tropical swell didn't manifest into a full hurricane until it passed just west of the Florida Keys, and in an uncalculated left turn began a merciless march toward Galveston. Even the surrounding states of Oklahoma and Kansas suffered blows by the Category 4 gale, with more than 3,600 homes wrecked in totality, and a series of storm-proof structures demolished. The total number of damages reached an outstanding $30 million, and a hard hit to the economy. After the travesty, however, the community of Galveston vowed to ensure such damage would be avoided in future storms. A 3.5-mile seawall was constructed, and in some parts of the city, levels were raised to an impressive 16 feet. 2. Hurricane Mitch. While Hurricane Mitch did not receive as much hype in the United States as his surly sisters Sandy and Katrina, the death and destruction caused by this disaster well exceeded some of history's more familiar storms. In October of 1998, the slow-moving hurricane took its calculated time, careful to demolish the country of Honduras, one fragile piece at a time. Hurricane Mitch unleashed up to 4 inches an hour of unstoppable rain for 2 whole days, inciting erratic flooding and mudslides every step of the way. 17,325 victims lost their lives, with thousands left missing, which rendered Mitch the second deadliest storm to hit the Western Hemisphere in a span of 200 years. The tropical tempest raged over Nicaragua as well, losing 2,000 people in one devastating mudslide alone. The cost of damage hit $5 billion for the Category 5 catastrophe, as much of the country's infrastructure and crops were obliterated. 1. The Great Hurricane of 1780. The United States was barely making a name for itself when the Great Hurricane of 1780 carved its way through the Caribbean, blasting the tropical terrain to shreds and killing approximately 22,000 residents. With the ink still fresh on the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War beginning to wind down, victims of the disaster included British and American soldiers commencing battle from various warships scattered amongst the region. As warfare surged, so did the tropical storm. Yet there isn't much recorded data on the hurricane's speed, nor the measure of rainfall. What researchers have uncovered, however, is that the swell ravaged numerous islands around the Caribbean, such as Barbados, Martinique, and St. Lucia over the course of 6 painstaking days. A local eyewitness renders the observation of bark stripped from trees, causing scientists to assume storm winds raged at about 200 miles per hour. The Great Hurricane of 1780 is considered the deadliest hurricane in history. And lastly, the image we showed earlier of the shark on the highway is nothing more than a hoax. While it is not unheard of for sea creatures to be washed up during drastic weather occurrences, such as tsunamis and hurricanes, the shark pictured was merely photoshopped in place from this original image. The Twitter account later followed with, "When America is this easy to troll with #fake news, we should all be worried." Have you ever been in or affected by a hurricane? Share your story with us in the comments section below, and it may be featured in one of our future videos. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to What Lurks Below.